Death isn't always the end. Sometimes it's a terrifying reset button. When I opened my eyes, the smell of my own burnt flesh and twisted metal from the car crash was suddenly replaced by the scent of expensive lavender perfume in our family's drawing room. My sister Daphne was staring at me with a triumphant, greedy glint in her eyes. "I'm marrying Liam," she declared, stealing my former husband and shoving me toward the ruthless billionaire she had always despised. She thought she was stealing my fairy tale. She didn't know she had just stolen my worst nightmare. The lingering sensation of shattered glass was still sharp against my skin, the echoing sound of crunching steel vibrating in my eardrums. My last memory was the steering wheel compressing my chest, the agonizing heat of flames, and Daphne's hysterical voice screaming from the passenger seat. "I wish I had your life, Chloe. I wish I had your husband." Then a violent jolt, a gasp for air, and I was sitting perfectly upright on the plush velvet sofa of our family's drawing room. I blinked, the oppressive silence of the room ringing in my ears. I wasn't trapped in a burning wreckage on a rainy highway. I was in my childhood home. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed precisely 3 times. The afternoon sun filtered through the heavy silk drapes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked down at my hands. They were pristine. No blood, no burns, no twisted, broken fingers. I was wearing the pale blue Prada dress I had worn exactly 5 years ago. "Chloe, are you listening?" My mother's voice, sharp and laced with her usual impatience, snapped my attention forward. Beatrice sat rigidly in her armchair, her pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. Beside her, my father, Richard, looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The situation is dire," my father was saying, his voice heavy with the weight of our family's impending bankruptcy. "The debt is insurmountable on our own. Both the Harringtons and the Kensingtons have offered mergers disguised as marital alliances. It's archaic, I know, but it's our only lifeline. Arthur Harrington and Liam Kensington are both willing to take a daughter. You two need to decide." A cold sweat broke out across my back. The memories of my past life crashed into me with the force of a tidal wave. In my previous life, I had sat on this exact sofa. On that day, Daphne, being the elder and the favored child, had turned her nose up at Liam Kensington. Liam was the heir to a flashy real estate empire, charming and boisterous. But Daphne wanted ultimate power. She chose Arthur Harrington, the notoriously cold, calculating CEO of Harrington Global. She wanted the prestige, the immense wealth, the crown of being untouchable. That left me with Liam. We all know how that ended. Daphne spent 5 years trapped in a gilded cage. Arthur provided for her lavishly, but gave her nothing of himself. He was a phantom husband working relentlessly, rarely speaking, and showing absolutely zero affection. Daphne withered under his icy indifference, growing bitter, paranoid, and desperately jealous. Meanwhile, I had thought I hit the jackpot with Liam. Liam was passionate. He bought me roses, swept me off my feet, and kissed me fiercely in public. Daphne saw the magazines, the paparazzi shots of our seemingly perfect, fiery romance. She saw my smiles and assumed I was living a fairy tale. What Daphne didn't see were the closed doors. She didn't see Liam's terrifying mood swings. She didn't see the bruises I had to cover with thick foundation. She didn't know that Liam's passion was actually possessive paranoia, that his real estate empire was built on a house of cards, and that he drank himself into violent rages when the banks called. For 5 years, I was a prisoner to a monster with a charming smile. The car crash that killed us both had happened because Daphne, drunk and miserable, had demanded I drive her away from a society gala, sobbing about how unfair it was that I got the loving husband. And now I was back. Before I could even process the miraculous, terrifying reality of my rebirth, Daphne shot up from her seat beside me. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wide and manic. She looked at me, and in that split second, I saw it. The recognition. The same haunting echo of the crash in her eyes. She remembers too. "I'm marrying Liam," Daphne blurted out, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings. She didn't even look at our parents. She was staring directly at me, a vicious, triumphant smirk pulling at the corners of her lips. "I want Liam Kensington. Chloe can have Arthur." My father blinked, taken aback by her sudden outburst. "Daphne, are you sure Arthur Harrington commands a significantly larger portfolio? The Harrington name, I don't care about the portfolio." Father, Daphne interrupted, her eyes never leaving mine. The malice radiating from her was palpable. She thought she had just won the ultimate victory. She thought she had outsmarted the universe. If Liam is the loving, passionate husband, and Arthur is the miserable iceberg, her eyes said to me, "I'm taking the passion. You can freeze to death." I slowly lowered my gaze to my lap, forcing my hands to tremble. I let a perfectly calibrated look of shock and mild devastation wash over my features. I bit my lower lip, looking up at our parents with wide, tear-filled eyes. If that is what Daphne wants," I whispered, my voice intentionally fragile, "I will marry Arthur, for the family." Daphne let out a short, breathy laugh of pure victory. She practically vibrated with excitement. "It's settled then," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I'm sure you and Mr. Harrington will be very happy together, sister." I kept my head bowed, hiding the sharp, dangerous smile that threatened to break across my face. "Oh, Daphne!" I thought the phantom pain of Liam's fists completely vanishing, replaced by a profound, chilling sense of relief. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." The arrangements moved with terrifying speed. Within 48 hours, the contracts were drawn up. The drawing room, previously a sanctuary of silence, became a war room of lawyers and prenuptial agreements. On Thursday afternoon, the two men arrived to formalize the arrangements. Liam Kensington walked in first. He was just as I remembered him, conventionally handsome, sporting a designer suit that was just a little too flashy, his hair perfectly styled. He flashed a brilliant, blinding smile, a bouquet of exotic orchids in his hand. "Daphne, my beautiful bride-to-be," Liam purred, stepping forward to kiss her hand. I felt a violent shudder ripple through my body. The sound of his voice triggered a deep, visceral nausea. I remembered the scent of his expensive cologne mixed with stale scotch. I remembered the weight of his hand around my throat. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, pressing my spine against the cool plaster of the wall to ground myself. Daphne, however, was radiant. She blushed, giggling, as she accepted the flowers, leaning into Liam's touch. She shot me a sideways glance, her eyes practically screaming, "Look what I have! Look what I took from you!" Then the heavy oak doors opened again, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Arthur Harrington stepped over the threshold. He was a man who commanded the very air around him. Standing at 6'3", broad-shouldered and immaculate in a charcoal bespoke suit, he looked less like a corporate executive and more like a reigning monarch assessing his territory. His features were striking but sharp, high cheekbones, a strong, unyielding jawline, and eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. There was no warmth in his expression, no easy smile. He was a fortress of a man. Daphne visibly shivered as she looked at him stepping closer to Liam. I could see the relief washing over her. She was remembering the 5 years of miserable echoing silence she had endured with Arthur in our past life. Arthur's gaze swept the room, entirely ignoring Liam's theatrical posturing, and landed directly on me, Miss Chloe. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that commanded absolute attention. He didn't bring flowers. He held a leather folio. "I assume you have reviewed the terms of our arrangement." "I have, Mr. Harrington," I replied, stepping away from the wall. My voice was steady, surprising even myself. In my past life, I had been terrified of this man's reputation. Now, looking into his cold, calculating eyes, all I felt was safety. A cold man does not lose his temper. A calculating man does not drink himself into a violent frenzy. He observed me for a long, quiet moment. His storm-gray eyes seemed to pierce right through my polite facade, searching for something. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently found it because he gave a curt, single nod. "Good. My assistant has the rings. We will announce the engagement to the press tomorrow at 8. I expect you to be punctual. No declarations of love. No charming smiles. Just business." "I'll be ready," I said softly. Daphne scoffed quietly from across the room, leaning her head on Liam's shoulder. "So romantic," she whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Liam chuckled, wrapping an arm around her waist, his hand resting possessively on her hip. I caught the subtle tightening of Arthur's jaw. He didn't look at Daphne, nor did he acknowledge Liam's mocking laugh. Instead, he took a step closer to me, closing the distance between us. His proximity was overwhelming, smelling of crisp cedar and expensive parchment. "I am not a man of poetry, Chloe," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low register meant only for my ears. "But I am a man of my word. You are under my protection now. No one will ever disrespect you in my presence, not even your own blood." My breath hitched. In my previous life, Daphne had always claimed Arthur never paid attention to anything outside of his spreadsheets. But in that brief moment, I realized something fundamental. Arthur Harrington noticed everything. He had seen Daphne's mockery. He had seen Liam's arrogance. And most importantly, he had seen me. The weeks leading up to the double wedding were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Our mother Beatrice insisted on throwing a massive combined engagement party at the country club. The event was designed to signal to high society that our family was back on top, secured by the immense wealth of our 2 new benefactors. Daphne used every single day of the preparation to rub her victory in my face. "Look at this, Chloe," Daphne cooed one afternoon in the bridal suite, thrusting her left hand into my face. A massive, gaudy 4-carat diamond rested on her ring finger. It caught the light, practically blinding everyone in the room. "Liam had it custom designed. He says nothing is too good for the woman he loves." She eyed my hand. Arthur had sent his head of security to deliver my ring. It was an antique, a flawless emerald-cut diamond set in platinum. It was elegant, understated, and probably worth triple what Liam had spent, but because Arthur hadn't delivered it on bended knee while weeping poetry, Daphne considered it a failure. "It's beautiful, Daphne," I said evenly, sipping my tea. I knew exactly how Liam had paid for that ring. He had leveraged another one of his failing strip malls to take out a high-interest loan. By year 2 of their marriage, the repo men would be knocking on their door. But I kept my mouth shut. Let her enjoy her illusion. Arthur is just so stiff, isn't he? Daphne continued feigning sympathy as she examined herself in the vanity mirror. I mean, he's handsome, I suppose, if you like that dead-eyed statue look. But I just need fire, you know? I need someone who burns for me. Liam is so passionate. Sometimes I think he loves me too much. I carefully set my teacup down. Too much. The phrase made my stomach churn. She had no idea what Liam's too much felt like when the doors were locked and he had had a bad day at the office. I prefer stability, I replied simply. Arthur provides that. Stability is just another word for boring, Daphne sneered. The night of the engagement party arrived. The ballroom was draped in white silk and overflowing with white roses. Daphne made her entrance on Liam's arm, laughing loudly, playing the part of the radiant beloved bride. Liam was in his element, shaking hands, slapping backs, and drinking champagne as if it were water. I stood by the entrance, waiting. Arthur had texted me briefly, delayed, board meeting, arriving at 8:15. He arrived at 8:14. The moment Arthur Harrington stepped into the ballroom, the ambient chatter dropped by a noticeable decibel level. He possessed a gravitational pull that demanded respect. He found me instantly through the crowd, his eyes locking onto mine, and he walked straight toward me, parting the sea of wealthy socialites without even trying. "Apologies for the delay," he said, offering his arm. "You're perfectly on time," I said, slipping my hand through the crook of his elbow. The muscles beneath his suit jacket were tense, unyielding. As we navigated the room, the contrast between the two couples was staggering. Daphne and Liam were the center of a chaotic, loud circle of sycophants. They were constantly touching Liam, pulling her in for dramatic, open-mouthed kisses for the cameras. Arthur and I, on the other hand, moved like reigning monarchs. We spoke in low voices. He introduced me to senators and foreign dignitaries with a quiet, terrifying authority. "My fiancée, Chloe," he would say, and the men would immediately bow their heads in respect. Midway through the evening, the inevitable collision happened. Liam, whose face was already flushed from too much whiskey, steered Daphne directly into our path. "Arthur, my man," Liam boomed aggressively, raising his glass. "Congratulations on the engagement, though I have to say you look like you're attending a funeral, not a celebration." Several people nearby went dead silent. You did not speak to Arthur Harrington that way. Arthur merely looked at Liam as if he were a mildly interesting stain on the carpet. "Kensington, I hear your stock plummeted another 4 points this morning. Perhaps you should be attending a board meeting instead of an open bar." Liam's smile faltered, a flash of genuine, ugly anger crossing his face. I knew that look. It was the look he got right before he threw a crystal tumbler at my head in our past life. Instinctively, without even realizing I was doing it, I flinched and took a half step backward, my shoulder pressing hard against Arthur's arm. Arthur felt it. He didn't look at me, but his entire demeanor shifted. The cold, indifferent aura he projected instantly solidified into something actively dangerous. He shifted his weight ever so slightly, positioning himself between me and Liam. "Daphne tells me you guys barely speak," Liam pushed on, trying to regain his alpha status, completely oblivious to the danger radiating from the man in front of him. "Marriage is about passion, Artie. Fire. You gotta keep the lady warm, you know what I mean?" He winked his eyes, trailing down my body in a way that made my skin crawl. Before Liam could blink, Arthur moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He simply stepped completely into Liam's personal space. The height difference wasn't massive, but Arthur's sheer presence made Liam look like a shrinking child. "If you ever look at my fiancé like that again," Arthur said, his voice a lethal silken whisper that only the four of us could hear, "I will ensure that not only does your company go bankrupt before the end of the fiscal quarter, but that you will personally never work in this city again. Do you understand me, Kensington?" Liam swallowed hard, all the color draining from his face. The bravado evaporated. It was a joke, Harrington. I lack a sense of humor," Arthur replied, deadpan. He turned his gaze to Daphne, who was staring at him in absolute shock. In her past life, Arthur had never defended her. He had never engaged in petty squabbles. But then again, Daphne had never flinched in fear. Arthur smoothly offered me his arm again. "Come, Chloe, the air here is terribly stagnant." As we walked away, leaving a pale Liam and a deeply confused Daphne behind, I looked up at Arthur's rigid profile. My heart was beating wildly against my ribs. "You didn't have to do that," I said quietly. Arthur didn't break his stride. "You are mine to protect Chloe. No one causes you distress. Not him, not anyone." He paused, glancing down at me, his sharp eyes softening just a fraction of a millimeter. "Why did you flinch?" The question caught me off guard. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that in another lifetime, that man had broken 3 of my ribs. He has a cruel energy," I murmured, looking away. "I just don't like him." Arthur's jaw clenched. "You will never have to be alone with him. I will make sure of it." That night, lying in my childhood bed, I touched the diamond on my finger. Daphne had chosen the passionate fire of Liam Kensington. She was right about one thing: fire burned, but I had chosen the iceberg. And what Daphne failed to understand was that ice didn't just freeze. It preserved, it shielded, it offered a foundation that couldn't be broken. The wedding was a media spectacle. My mother insisted on a lavish double ceremony at the cathedral, followed by a reception at the plaza. Daphne was a vision in an extravagant lace gown, demanding constant attention, while I chose a timeless, elegant silk dress. As I walked down the aisle, I focused entirely on Arthur. He stood tall and unmoving, looking immaculate. We recited our vows with steady voices, while Daphne and Liam put on a theatrical performance of tears and dramatic flair. The reception was a blur of flashing lights and forced smiles, but when it was finally time to leave, the atmosphere shifted. Liam scooped Daphne into his arms, carrying her to a waiting Hummer as she shrieked with laughter. Arthur simply placed a firm, protective hand on the small of my back, guiding me to his understated black Maybach. The door shut, sealing us inside a quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary that muted the chaos outside. The drive to the Harrington estate was silent, not the uncomfortable silence I had feared, but a companionable, exhausted quiet. I slipped off my high heels, rubbing my aching arches. Arthur glanced over, opened a compartment in the armrest, and silently handed me a pair of incredibly soft cashmere hotel slippers. "You keep slippers in the car?" I asked, stunned. "My assistant mentioned that brides' feet usually suffer," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. A genuine small smile touched my lips. "Thank you, Arthur. Your assistant is a lifesaver." We arrived at the Harrington estate, a sprawling architectural marvel of glass and dark wood. Inside the house was immaculate and somewhat sterile. Arthur turned to me in the foyer, his expression guarded. Your luggage has been moved to the East Wing, he informed me. I reside in the West Wing. I operate on strict schedules and often take calls at night. I assumed you would appreciate your own space to avoid disruption. In my past life, this was exactly what Daphne had complained about, calling it a sign of neglect. But as I looked at Arthur, I saw his tension. He was expecting an argument. Instead, a wave of profound relief washed over me. Peace. A locked door. No drunken demands. Arthur, I said, my voice sincere. That sounds wonderful. Thank you. He looked genuinely taken aback, his gray eyes flickering with surprise. You are agreeable to this. I am a light sleeper, I lied smoothly. Having my own sanctuary is a luxury. He showed me to the East Wing. The master suite was breathtaking, filled with my favorite books and views of the forest. He really had paid attention to the details I mentioned during our negotiations. If you need anything, the landline dials directly to my quarters, he said, lingering in the doorway. I stepped closer, reaching out to lay my hand on his chest. Beneath his dress shirt, I felt the powerful, steady rhythm of his heart. Good night, Arthur, and thank you for everything today. He looked down at my hand, then back to my face. A sudden intense heat flashed in his eyes, a raw, unguarded emotion that shattered his icy exterior. He raised his hand and brushed his knuckles against my cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. Sleep well, Mrs. Harrington, he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly dark register. He closed the door, leaving me alone. I stood there, my cheek burning from his touch. Iceberg, I thought. Daphne, you fool. There is a volcano hiding under that ice. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Daphne. I stared at the glowing screen. I knew what was happening. On our wedding night, Liam had gotten blackout drunk on the private jet to the Maldives. He had screamed at me for talking to the flight attendant, throwing a glass of champagne against the bulkhead. That was when the mask had slipped. I let it ring. Then I answered. Chloe, please pick up. Daphne whispered, her voice wet with tears. He went crazy, Chloe. We got to the hotel and I asked why he was drinking so much, and he snapped. He broke a vase. He said he owns me now. I'm locked in the bathroom and he's pounding on the door. I'm scared. I closed my eyes. A phantom pain flared in my ribs, a reminder of the hell she was stepping into. She had chosen this. She had looked at the two lives in front of us, saw the monster, and actively shoved me toward it, just to steal the spotlight. You wanted passion. Daphne, I said, my voice echoing coldly in the luxury of my safe room. You chose the fire. Learn to enjoy the burn. I hung up, blocked her number, and tossed the phone away. As I lay back down, I saw a shadow shift in the hallway outside my bedroom. 2 feet stood there. Arthur. He was standing guard in the dark, making sure I was safe. I pulled the duvet up to my chin, a triumphant smile spreading across my face. My second chance had truly begun. The morning after my wedding to the most feared billionaire in the city, I awoke not to the sound of breaking glass or shouting, but to the gentle chirping of birds outside my massive bay window. I stretched against the Egyptian cotton sheets, a profound sense of peace settling into my bones. I dressed in a simple, elegant beige cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, making my way down the winding staircase to the solarium. Arthur was already there. He sat at the head of a long glass dining table, dressed immaculately in a navy suit, an iPad in one hand, and a cup of black coffee in the other. He didn't look up as I entered, but he spoke immediately. "Good morning, Chloe. I trust your accommodations were satisfactory." "More than satisfactory, Arthur." "Thank you," I replied, taking a seat to his right. A quiet, unassuming housekeeper materialized almost instantly, placing a plate in front of me. It was a perfectly executed spinach and feta omelet, accompanied by a side of fresh berries and Earl Grey tea. I stared at it momentarily stunned. Arthur finally glanced up, catching my surprise. "During the contract negotiations, your father's secretary provided a dossier on your preferences. I instructed the staff to ensure your dietary habits were accommodated." My heart did a strange, completely unexpected flutter. In my previous life, I had cooked Liam a full English breakfast every morning, precisely the way he demanded, and if the bacon was even slightly undercooked, the plate would be thrown against the wall. Arthur, a man who controlled global supply chains, had taken the time to memorize my favorite breakfast. "You are surprisingly attentive for a man who claims to have no time for romance." I noted a small, genuine smile playing on my lips. Arthur's storm gray eyes locked onto mine. "Attention to detail is not romance, Chloe. It is efficiency. I require my household to run smoothly, and an unhappy partner is a liability." His tone was strictly business, but the slight, almost imperceptible softening of his jaw told a different story. Our peaceful domesticity was interrupted 3 days later by a mandatory family gathering. My mother Beatrice insisted on a Sunday brunch at our family estate to celebrate the successful unions. As Arthur's Maybach pulled up to my childhood home, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. Arthur must have sensed it, because as we walked up the steps, he smoothly slid his hand to the small of my back, an anchor in the storm. We walked into the conservatory to find my parents already seated. A moment later, Liam and Daphne arrived. The contrast was jarring. Liam entered loudly, a booming laugh echoing through the glass room as he clapped my father on the shoulder. Daphne trailed behind him. She was wearing a stunning high-necked silk blouse with long, flowing sleeves. It was 80 degrees outside. "Look at the happy couples," Liam announced, pulling Daphne against him roughly. He planted a wet, dramatic kiss on her cheek. Daphne smiled, but it was brittle. Her eyes, usually so sharp and arrogant, looked exhausted. Through the heavy layers of premium foundation, I could see the subtle, yellowish tint of a fading bruise just beneath her left cheekbone. A cold wave of vindication mixed with a chilling sense of déjà vu washed over me. I knew exactly how that bruise had gotten there. I knew the exact angle of the ring on Liam's right hand that caused it. Daphne's eyes met mine, and for a split second, the facade dropped. There was a desperate, panicked plea in her gaze. But then Liam's grip on her waist tightened, and she immediately snapped her eyes away, laughing at a joke he hadn't even finished making. During brunch, Liam attempted to dominate the conversation, bragging loudly about a new commercial development his company Kensington Realty was launching. "It's going to revolutionize the waterfront," Liam boasted, swirling his mimosa. "In fact, Artie, you might want to take notes. Harrington Global could learn a thing or two about aggressive expansion." The table went dead silent. My father looked absolutely terrified. Arthur slowly set down his silver fork. He looked at Liam with the cold, detached interest of a biologist observing a mildly annoying insect. "Aggressive expansion is only beneficial when backed by liquid assets. Kensington." Arthur said, his voice dropping into that quiet, lethal register. Leveraging 3 failing strip malls as collateral for a high-interest short-term waterfront loan is not expansion. It is financial suicide. I give it 6 months before your creditors come knocking. Liam's face drained of color. His jaw dropped, and he sputtered trying to find a comeback, but Arthur had already returned to eating his poached salmon, completely dismissing him. After brunch, I excused myself to the powder room. I had just finished reapplying my lipstick when the door forcefully opened, clicking shut behind Daphne. She looked unhinged. The perfectly styled hair was slightly frizzy, and she was breathing heavily. "You knew," she hissed, pointing a trembling manicured finger at me. "You knew he was crazy." I turned slowly, leaning against the marble vanity. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Daphne." "Don't lie to me," she shrieked, taking a step forward. "The wedding night, the drinking, the screaming, he's a monster, Chloe. He locked me in the closet for 2 hours yesterday because I smiled at the valet." Tears began to streak her meticulous makeup, ruining the heavy concealer over her cheekbone. "I want to switch back. You have to tell Father we made a mistake. Arthur isn't touching you, is he? We can divorce them and swap. It's the only way." I stared at her, utterly bewildered by her delusion. Even in her suffering, her narcissism was boundless. "Switch back!" I repeated, my voice dripping with ice. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until she was forced to look directly into my eyes. "Let me make something perfectly clear to you, Daphne. I am not a pawn you can trade when you are no longer entertained." "But he's hurting me," she cried out. "And you thought he would hurt me?" I whispered the brutal truth hanging in the air between us. "You pushed me toward him because you wanted his passion, and you wanted me to freeze with Arthur. You made your bed. Now lie in it." "You heartless bitch," she sobbed, backing away. "You chose the fire, sister." I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the dark satisfaction swirling inside me. "Don't come crying to me when you get burned." The weeks turned into 2 months, and my life with Arthur settled into a quiet, fascinating rhythm. We lived parallel lives under the same massive roof, yet our orbits were constantly pulling closer. He worked late. I left a plate of warm food covered in the kitchen for him. I read in the conservatory. He would sit in the armchair opposite me, reviewing contracts in companionable silence. We never spoke of love, but there was a deep, undeniable undercurrent of respect and an escalating unspoken tension that hummed between us. One Tuesday afternoon, I decided to visit Harrington Global. Arthur had casually mentioned a severe headache the night before, and I had taken it upon myself to bring him a specific herbal tea blend from my personal stash, along with a light lunch from his favorite artisan deli. When I arrived at the executive floor, his formidable assistant, Mrs. Higgins, beamed at me. "Mrs. Harrington." "What a wonderful surprise. He's in his office. You can go right in." I opened the heavy mahogany door. Arthur was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city skyline. His jacket was off his sleeves, rolled up, revealing muscular forearms. He turned as I entered, and the immediate softening of his harsh features made my pulse race. "Chloe," he said, genuinely surprised. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "You left without eating breakfast," I chastised, gently setting the thermal bag on his desk. "And you had a migraine yesterday. I brought reinforcements." He walked over his eyes, lingering on me in a way that made my breath hitch. "You came all the way downtown to deliver tea. Consider it an investment in my husband's health. You're no use to me if you collapse from a caffeine overdose." A low, deep chuckle rumbled in his chest, a sound so rare and beautiful, it felt like a physical caress. "Thank you." As he unpacked the lunch, my eyes drifted to a manila folder lying open on his desk. Stamped across the top in red ink was the word confidential. Beneath it, I saw the undeniable crest of Kensington Realty. I froze. Arthur, what is this? He paused, looking at the folder, then back to me. He didn't scramble to hide it. He was too calculating for that. I told you on the night of our engagement party that I would protect you, Arthur said, his voice dropping into a serious, uncompromising tone. I do not make idle promises, Chloe. I have had my head of security, Mr. Hayes, looking into your brother-in-law. Why? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Because a man who lacks discipline in public is a tyrant in private, Arthur stated, taking a step toward me. I saw the way you flinched when he raised his voice. I saw the bruises your sister is currently failing to hide. And I see the terror in your father's eyes whenever Kensington's business practices are mentioned. He reached out his large, warm hand, gently cupping my cheek. His thumb brushed across my jawline. I am buying up Kensington's debt, Chloe, through shadow subsidiaries. He thinks he owes money to a dozen different banks. In reality, he owes 70% of his portfolio directly to me. I stared at him, completely awestruck. He was systematically dismantling my sister's abuser, not out of petty revenge, but with the cold, ruthless precision of a master tactician. When the time comes, Arthur continued, his eyes darkening with a fierce, possessive intensity. I will pull the rug out from under him. He will lose everything. The company, the money, the power. He will never be able to hold his influence over your family or you ever again. Arthur, I breathed, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what he was doing for me. He wasn't just an iceberg. He was a glacier, slowly, inevitably crushing everything in his path to keep me safe. Why are you doing this? I whispered. He stepped fully into my space. The scent of cedar and pure, undeniable power wrapped around me. Because you are my wife, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. And what is mine I protect with my life. Before I could process the weight of his words, Arthur closed the remaining distance. His mouth crashed down on mine, completely shattering the careful, polite boundaries we had maintained for 2 months. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was completely consuming, fierce, and desperately possessive. My hands instantly flew to his broad shoulders, pulling him closer. He groaned, wrapping one arm tightly around my waist, lifting me slightly off the floor, his other hand tangling in my hair. The iceberg had finally cracked, and the heat underneath was blinding. I kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring 5 years of past life trauma and present life gratitude into the connection. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our foreheads resting against each other. No more separate wings, Arthur demanded softly, his voice raspy. No more separate wings, I agreed, a triumphant smile blooming on my face. Just as he leaned in to claim my lips again, the intercom on his desk buzzed loudly. Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Higgins's voice crackled, sounding uncharacteristically tense. I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation in the lobby. Daphne Kensington is downstairs. She is bypassing security and demanding to speak with you immediately. She says it's a matter of life and death. Arthur's jaw instantly locked. The tender, passionate man vanished, replaced once again by the ruthless CEO. He looked down at me, his eyes promising violence against anyone who threatened our peace. Send her up, Mrs. Higgins, Arthur said coldly, his hand sliding down to interlock with mine. Let us see what the desperate rat does when the ship begins to sink. The heavy mahogany doors of Arthur's office flew open, hitting the rubber stoppers with a violent thud. Daphne stood in the doorway, breathing heavily, flanked by two towering security guards who looked toward Arthur for permission to remove her. Arthur raised a single commanding hand. The guards stepped back, allowing the heavy doors to click shut behind her. Daphne was a catastrophic mess. The polished, arrogant socialite who had sneered at me mere weeks ago was gone. She wore a crumpled trench coat over a torn silk blouse. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was tangled, plastered to her forehead with cold sweat. She wore oversized dark sunglasses, but they were slightly askew, revealing the swollen, deep purple skin of a severe black eye. She didn't even look at me. Her frantic, bloodshot eyes locked entirely on Arthur. "Arthur!" Daphne gasped, her voice trembling as she stumbled forward, clutching a thick, crumpled leather portfolio to her chest. "Thank God. You have to help me. You're the only one with enough power to stop him." Arthur remained completely still, his tall frame positioned defensively between Daphne and me. His face was an unreadable mask carved from granite. "You are trespassing in a secure corporate facility, Daphne. Speak quickly." Daphne swallowed hard tears, spilling over the rims of her sunglasses. She threw the leather portfolio onto Arthur's pristine glass desk. It landed with a heavy, damning slap. "I have everything." Daphne rushed out her words, tripping over each other in her desperation. "Liam is broke Arthur. He's completely insolvent. But worse than that, he's committing massive federal fraud. He's been forging signatures on mezzanine loans. I found his private ledgers. I hired a private auditor, David Gallagher, to pull these records. Liam is embezzling from his own investors to pay off offshore gambling debts." She took a step closer, reaching out as if to touch Arthur's arm, but his icy glare pinned her in place. She dropped her hand, her chest heaving. "He found out I was looking into his files." Daphne sobbed, a genuine note of terror cracking her voice. "He hit me. He told me if I tried to leave, he would kill me and make it look like an overdose. Please, Arthur, I brought you the evidence. You can use this to take over Kensington Realty for pennies on the dollar. I'll testify against him. I'll give you everything you need to destroy him." She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her trembling hand, her true motive finally surfacing through the panic. All I ask in return is your protection. Hide me. Set me up with a trust fund. Let me stay at one of your properties." I watched her from behind Arthur's shoulder, a cold, heavy stone settling in my stomach. Even now, beaten and terrified, Daphne was playing a game of transactions. She wasn't seeking justice. She was trying to negotiate a golden parachute. She was trying to sell her abuser to the highest bidder to save her own lavish lifestyle. Arthur stared at the portfolio on his desk for a long, suffocating moment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the city traffic 50 stories below. Slowly, Arthur reached out and pushed the portfolio back toward the edge of the desk with a single finger, as if it were contaminated. "I have no use for your stolen documents, Daphne." Arthur said, his voice quiet, flat, and utterly devoid of mercy. Daphne's jaw dropped. "What? But it's the key to ruining him. You can take his entire empire." "I already have," Arthur replied smoothly. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, my shadow subsidiaries officially acquired the entirety of Liam Kensington's defaulted debt. I do not need your auditor's files to expose his fraud. I have already submitted a comprehensive dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission, authorized by my lead counsel, Jonathan Brooks. Federal agents will be freezing his accounts by the end of the business day. Daphne stared at him, her brain struggling to process the scope of his absolute dominance. You already did it. I am a businessman, Daphne. I do not wait for desperate women to bring me scraps, Arthur stated coldly. Furthermore, I am not a sanctuary for you. But he'll kill me! She shrieked, the reality of her isolation finally setting in. She turned to me, her eyes wide with frantic begging energy. Chloe, please, you have to tell him. You're my sister. You have to let me stay with you. I stepped out from behind Arthur, standing shoulder to shoulder with my husband. I felt Arthur's hand rest firmly against the small of my back, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. I looked at the woman who had happily tossed me into the fire in our past life. The woman who had smirked as she stole the loving husband, leaving me to what she thought would be a lifetime of misery. You made your choice in the drawing room, Daphne. I said, my voice eerily calm, mirroring Arthur's absolute detachment. You looked at the two men standing before us, and you greedily snatched the one you thought would give you the most attention. You wanted the fire. I made a mistake, she wailed, collapsing to her knees on the plush carpet. You didn't make a mistake. You made a calculation, I corrected her, staring down at her crumpled form. A calculation based entirely on your own vanity, and now the math is catching up to you. Arthur pressed a button on his desk console. Mrs. Higgins, send Mr. Hayes and his team in. Escort Daphne Kensington to the lobby. If she attempts to re-enter the building, call the authorities. The doors opened instantly. Mr. Hayes, a broad-shouldered ex-military tactician, stepped in with two guards. They hoisted a sobbing, screaming Daphne to her feet. You can't do this, Chloe. You owe me. I'm your sister, she shrieked as they dragged her backward out of the office. I owe you nothing, I whispered to the empty air as the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, severing her from my life completely. Arthur turned to me, his storm-gray eyes assessing my pale face. He reached out his warm thumbs, gently brushing my cheekbones. Are you all right? I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, feeling the steady rhythmic pulse of his wrists. I am now. Let's finish this. Friday morning arrived with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of a winter freeze. Liam Kensington believed he was attending a private high-stakes refinancing meeting at Caldwell & Sons Banking. He believed he was going to charm his way into another extension leveraging fake assets to keep his sinking ship afloat for just one more quarter. He had no idea the guillotine had already been raised. Arthur and I sat in the expansive glass-walled conference room of the bank. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Robert Caldwell, the senior banking executive, looking deeply uncomfortable and sweating profusely into the collar of his bespoke suit. At precisely 10 a.m., the double doors swung open. Liam strolled in, projecting an aura of aggressive confidence. He wore a flashy silver suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, a thick gold Rolex gleaming on his wrist. Robert, my man, Liam boomed, holding his arms out expansively. Let's get this paperwork sorted. I have a tea time at... Liam froze. His booming voice died in his throat as his eyes landed on Arthur, who was sitting casually with his hands steepled in front of him. Then Liam's gaze shifted to me, sitting upright and perfectly composed at Arthur's right side. The swagger instantly evaporated, replaced by a twitching, paranoid confusion. Harrington Chloe. What the hell is this? Liam demanded, his eyes darting toward the banker. "Robert, I thought this was a closed meeting. Why is my brother-in-law here?" Robert Caldwell swallowed hard, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Kensington, please take a seat. The nature of this meeting has shifted. Mr. Harrington is here representing the primary debt holders of your estate." Liam scoffed, marching over and slamming his hands down on the table, leaning aggressively toward Arthur. "Primary debt holders. What kind of joke is this, Artie? My loans are diversified across 4 different institutions. They were—" Arthur corrected his voice, a low, lethal hum that vibrated through the room. He didn't blink. He didn't lean back. He held Liam's aggressive stare with the absolute stillness of an apex predator. "Until Tuesday, over the past 48 hours, Harrington Global has quietly purchased the notes on every single one of your outstanding loans, mortgages, and credit lines. I am no longer your brother-in-law, Kensington. I am your absolute sole creditor." Liam's face flushed a deep, violent crimson. The veins in his neck bulged. "You can't do that. That's corporate sabotage." Arthur slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished wood. "It is entirely legal and entirely finalized, which brings us to the purpose of this meeting." Arthur paused, letting the silence stretch, tightening the noose. "You are in default, Kensington, to the tune of $85 million, and I am calling in the debt, all of it, effective immediately." The words struck Liam like physical blows. He staggered back a half step, the false bravado shattering into absolute panic. 85. Arthur, be reasonable. The market is slow. I just need a 6-month extension. You know the waterfront property is going to boom. The waterfront property is built on forged environmental impact reports, Arthur stated coldly. Reports you authorized. The SEC raided your corporate offices an hour ago. By noon, your stock will be delisted. By tonight, you will be facing federal indictment. I watched the monster who had terrorized my past life completely unravel. The charming, fiery passion Daphne had craved was nothing but a fragile mask hiding a weak, desperate con artist. He was sweating now, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. "This is you." Liam suddenly spat, his wild, bloodshot eyes snapping to me. The raw, violent hatred in his gaze was identical to the look he had given me the night of the car crash. "You put him up to this, you calculating little bitch. You couldn't stand that Daphne got the better deal." Before anyone could react, Liam lunged across the table. His hand shot out, aiming directly for my throat. The phantom memory of his fingers bruising my skin flared in my mind, but I didn't even have time to flinch. Arthur moved with terrifying, explosive speed. He didn't shout for security. He didn't back away. In one fluid motion, Arthur stood, caught Liam's outstretched wrist mid-air, and twisted it downward with a sickening, brutal torque. Liam shrieked in agony as his face was slammed directly into the solid mahogany table. The impact rattled the coffee cups. Arthur stood over him, still pinning Liam's arm behind his back, at an angle that promised a shattered shoulder if he moved even an inch. Arthur's face was inches from Liam's ear, his voice a chilling, demonic whisper, "If you ever speak to my wife in that tone again." Arthur promised, the sheer concentrated violence in his tone freezing the blood in my veins. "I will not just ruin your finances. I will break every bone in your hands so you can never sign another fraudulent check or raise a hand to another woman for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life." Mr. Hayes and the bank's security team burst into the room, their weapons drawn. Arthur calmly released Liam, stepping back and straightening his immaculate tie as if he had merely swatted a fly. He offered his hand to me. "Take this trash out of my sight," Arthur ordered the guards without looking down at the groaning, weeping man on the floor. "Mr. Caldwell processed the liquidations." I took Arthur's hand, his skin still radiating intense heat from the adrenaline. We walked out of the conference room together, leaving the wreckage of Liam Kensington behind us. As we stepped into the private elevator, the doors sliding shut to seal us in our own quiet world, I looked up at the man who had reshaped my destiny. He wasn't the cold, unfeeling iceberg Daphne had warned me about. He was an immovable fortress, a tactical genius who wielded his power not to subjugate, but to protect. "It's over," I breathed the final lingering weight of my past life, dissolving completely. Arthur pulled me flush against his chest, wrapping both arms around me in a fiercely protective embrace. He pressed a deep, lingering kiss to the top of my head. "It's just beginning, Chloe," he murmured into my hair. "No one will ever hurt you again." I closed my eyes, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. Daphne had chased the fire and burned to ashes. I had chosen the fortress, and within its walls I had found my true, untouchable sanctuary. The destruction of Liam Kensington was not a loud, chaotic explosion. It was a surgical, systematic dismantling, executed with the cold, terrifying precision of a military strike. By noon that Friday, federal agents from the SEC and the FBI had breached the glass doors of Kensington Realty. They moved methodically, confiscating hard drives, sealing file cabinets, and freezing every single corporate and personal account tied to Liam's name. The media caught wind of the raid within the hour. By 2 o'clock, helicopter cameras were circling the Kensington penthouse. I watched the live broadcast from the quiet sanctuary of Arthur's office, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea. On the massive flat-screen television, the sleek private elevator doors of the penthouse opened to the underground garage. Liam was escorted out in handcuffs, his flashy silver suit rumpled, his face buried in his chest to hide from the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras. Right behind him, flanked by 2 female federal agents, was Daphne. She wasn't wearing handcuffs, but she looked as though she were walking to her own execution. She was screaming at the reporters, waving her hands frantically to block the lenses, her designer trench coat slipping off one shoulder. The agents pushed her firmly into the back of a black government SUV. Arthur walked up behind my chair, resting his large, warm hands on my shoulders. His touch sent a grounding wave of calm through my body. "She wasn't arrested," Arthur murmured, reading the ticker at the bottom of the screen. "Merely detained for questioning as a person of interest. Her signature is likely on several of the joint tax filings covering up the offshore gambling debts." "She didn't read anything she signed," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any pity. "She only cared about the zero balance on her black card." "Ignorance is not a recognized legal defense against federal fraud. Chloe." Arthur stated, his thumbs pressing gently into the tense muscles of my neck. "Jonathan Brooks, my lead counsel, informed me that the prosecutors are seeking a maximum sentence for Liam. Given the volume of the embezzlement defrauding over 200 individual investors, he is looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Minimum." I closed my eyes, letting the sheer magnitude of that number wash over me. 20 years. In my past life, I had spent 5 years trapped in a gilded cage of violence and terror, believing there was no escape. Now the monster was being locked in a real cage, completely stripped of the wealth and power he had used as weapons. Institutional justice, cold and unyielding, had finally caught up to him. The trial moved with astonishing speed, fueled by the airtight dossier Arthur's tactical team had compiled. Liam's defense attorneys tried to paint him as a victim of a volatile market, but the paper trail of forged mezzanine loans and offshore accounts was insurmountable. Daphne's fate, however, became a desperate, pathetic public spectacle. With all of Liam's assets frozen and seized for restitution, Daphne was instantly destitute. Our father, terrified of the Harrington wrath and facing his own precarious financial recovery, formally disowned her. He released a brief press statement condemning Liam's actions and distancing the family from the scandal. Daphne tried to secure a plea deal offering to testify against Liam in exchange for immunity, but she had nothing the prosecution didn't already possess. Worse, the prosecutors discovered that Daphne had actively transferred funds from a charity gala account directly into a private shell corporation to purchase a $1 million diamond necklace just days before the raid. She wasn't just a blind wife. She was an active parasite. 3 weeks later, I sat in the back row of the federal courthouse, cloaked in a dark, understated coat, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over my face. Arthur sat beside me, his presence an impenetrable wall of security. Judge Harrison, an older, stern-faced man with zero tolerance for white-collar crime, looked down from his bench. Liam stood in a bright orange jumpsuit, completely hollowed out. The arrogant, fiery CEO was dead, replaced by a trembling, broken shell of a man. Daphne stood at the adjacent defense table, wearing a faded gray blouse she had clearly borrowed from a public defender. Her blonde hair was lifeless, her roots showing dark and greasy. "Liam Kensington." Judge Harrison's voice boomed through the microphone, echoing off the high oak walls. "For the charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud, I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Liam's knees buckled. A U.S. Marshal had to catch him by the arm to keep him upright. Judge Harrison then turned his piercing gaze toward Daphne. She was vibrating with terror, tears streaming silently down her pale cheeks. "Daphne Kensington." The judge continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "You utilized stolen funds to fuel a lifestyle of grotesque excess, showing absolutely no regard for the working families your husband defrauded. For your role as an accessory to fraud and money laundering, I sentence you to 4 years in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and full financial restitution." Daphne let out a raw, agonizing shriek. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire universe collapse. She whipped her head around her wild, bloodshot eyes, scanning the gallery until they landed on me. "Chloe," she screamed, lunging against the wooden barricade before the bailiffs grabbed her arms. "Chloe, please, you won. You got the money. You got the power. Please don't let them do this. We're blood." I didn't move. I didn't break eye contact. I let her see the absolute freezing void in my expression. I let her look into the eyes of the sister she had condemned to a burning car wreck in another lifetime. Slowly, I reached over and took Arthur's hand, resting our intertwined fingers on the mahogany pew in full view of her. Daphne stopped screaming. Her mouth fell open as she stared at our joined hands. The final crushing realization seemed to click into place behind her eyes. She hadn't just lost a game of social chess. She had thrown away her own salvation and handed me an empire. The bailiffs dragged her through the side doors, her sobs fading into the sterile, echoing halls of the courthouse. "It is done," Arthur said quietly, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes." I breathed the heavy, suffocating weight that had rested on my chest since the moment I woke up on that velvet sofa, finally lifting. It really is. 6 months later, the first heavy snow of winter blanketed the Harrington estate. The house was warm, smelling of pine needles, roasting firewood, and dark coffee. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of our shared master suite, watching the white flakes cover the manicured grounds. My life had transformed into a partnership of quiet, formidable strength. I no longer spent my days reading aimlessly. I managed charitable trusts and vetted high-level proposals with the same cold efficiency Arthur applied to his acquisitions. In our evenings, we sat in his study, dissecting power dynamics and plotting the expansion of Harrington Global. I had learned that Arthur's icy exterior wasn't a lack of emotion, but a vault where he kept his intensity. In private, he was fiercely devoted, his coldness melting into a passionate protective anchor. The bedroom door clicked open. Arthur had just returned from a week-long summit in Geneva. He dropped his briefcase, loosening his silk tie. The exhaustion in his eyes vanished the moment he saw me. "You're home early," I said, a soft smile touching my lips. He crossed the room in purposeful strides, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and pulling me flush against his chest. He buried his face in my neck, inhaling deeply. The negotiations concluded early. I found I had no desire to remain in Switzerland when my wife was an ocean away. I leaned back, resting my hands over his. On my finger, the antique diamond caught the firelight. "I received a letter today," I said softly. "From the federal facility in Danbury, from Daphne." Arthur's grip tightened imperceptibly. "You are under no obligation to engage with her, Chloe. I can have Mr. Hayes return it unopened." "I know," I replied, smoothing the crease between his brows. "But I need to close the door completely." Arthur gave a single curt nod. "I will accompany you, but I will remain in the vehicle. This is yours to finish." 2 days later, the Maybach pulled up to the barbed wire gates of the Danbury Correctional Facility. The sky was a bruised gray, mirroring the stark concrete. Inside, I was escorted into a sterile visitation room, separated by thick, smudged plexiglass. A moment later, Daphne was led in. The socialite was gone, replaced by a sallow, aged woman in a baggy khaki uniform. Her hands shook as she picked up the telephone receiver. I picked up mine. "Hello, Daphne." She stared at me through the glass. She looked at my pristine cashmere sweater and the quiet aura of power I now carried. "You knew," she whispered, her voice crackling through the cheap speaker. "You knew what Liam was. You knew what would happen." "Liam's instability was no secret," I said evenly. "No," she interrupted, shaking her head. "That day in the drawing room when I said I wanted Liam, you didn't fight me. You didn't argue. You just lowered your head and took Arthur. You played me Chloe. You acted like a martyr so I would jump into the fire." She pressed her hand against the glass. "How did you know Arthur would protect you?" "It's like you had seen it all happen before." I leaned closer, dropping my voice to a steady, chilling whisper. "Sometimes, Daphne, when you stand too close to the flames, you get burned. The universe gave me a chance to rise from the ashes. I merely chose to build a fortress out of ice while you chose to dance in the inferno." Daphne's breath hitched. The horror of her own choices sank in the finality of my words, sealing her fate. "Goodbye, Daphne," I said, placing the receiver back on the hook. I turned my back on her frantic, muffled shouting and walked out without a backward glance. When I stepped into the freezing winter air, Arthur was waiting by the car, his overcoat billowing in the wind. He didn't ask what was said. He simply read the absolute peace in my eyes and offered his arm. "Are we finished here, Mrs. Harrington?" he asked. I slipped my hand into his, feeling the solid, unyielding strength beneath his sleeve. I looked back at the prison once, then forward to the limitless future waiting for me. "Yes, Arthur," I smiled, stepping into the warmth of the car. "We are completely finished." And that is the epic conclusion to Chloe's second chance. Daphne's greed led straight to her downfall, while Chloe's strategic brilliance and Arthur's protection built an empire that no one could shatter. Did you guess how Arthur would dismantle Liam's life? What was your favorite twist in this story of rebirth? If you loved this dramatic conclusion, please hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss another intense saga.